Well, I'll trade you for a new plow, 2 tubs of lard, barrel of molasses, 25 pounds of chewing tobacco. And you wouldn't have a wife under the counter there. I'm looking for a wife.
Any special brand?
Hi guys, and welcome back to my movie channel. It's nice to have you here. Today we're talking about Seven Brides for Seven Brothers from 1954, which is a classic musical. It's a really odd film, so I'm kind of excited to talk to you about it. It's the story of 7 brothers. So it's set in Oregon in 1850 on the frontier, and these 7 brothers are like tough mountain men and they're the brothers are inspired by the rape of the Sabine women to kidnap brides from the local small town after they see how happy their recently married eldest brother is. So I mean, we're 1 minute in and you can already see how this is problematic. So it's directed by Stanley Donen. If you don't know who he is the guy who did Singing in the Rain. And he teamed up with Michael Kidd for choreography on this movie. So Donen is kind of famous if you think of Singing in the Rain and some of his other musicals. Prior to his era, they were often set sort of in a backstage theater setting because it kind of allowed the music to kind of fit in, you know, in people's minds. Like, you're in the theater, so of course they'd be singing and dancing, right? So he made stories more in the real everyday world, where the songs kind of pushed the story forward or told some of the story, as opposed to slowing down the action by kind of stopping to have a musical number. So that was kind of his innovation. So it's funny because you think of the kind of obvious sexism in this of kidnapping brides, kidnapping women to be your bride. You kind of think, oh, that's the 50s for you. But even in the 20s and 30s, if you are watching films from that era that I've been sharing with you, or if you just like that era, you can see so many people talking in those like 20, 30 years before this movie about equality in relationships. If you read books from the 20s and 30s, there was a real idea of equality in women having more choice and being treated more as equal and that kind of thing. So this concept was kind of backwards even for its own time. So what is the story of the Sabine women? It comes from Roman legend. Livy is one of the main sources for this story, but I think there are some others. And the idea is that Romulus, if you remember him, Romulus and Remus, Romulus was the founder of Rome. So he had just founded Rome with his buddies, and since most of his guys were guys, there were not enough women in Rome to keep the city going. And because they were kind of roughnecks, the people around Rome didn't really want to marry into Roman society. So they decided to just take matters into their own hands, and they kidnapped 30 women from the Sabine region. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of statues of these women being taken. It's very kind of horrible. Obviously these women were taken against, I mean, it's a myth, there's not proof of this, but the women were taken against their will. And so the story is generally called the rape of the Sabine women because that's what's happening. But in this movie, it's 1954, so the women here are not raped, which is great. But they are taken from small town, and they're stuck for the winter. They're angry and afraid, and I mean, I think they try to ameliorate this concept by having some early sort of scenes in the film where the brothers are like flirting with these girls and the girls are flirting with the brothers, so it's not like they don't know them and they are interested in them, but I mean, it's still pretty horrible. And they are stuck in this sort of log cabin because there's an avalanche. They're stuck there for the whole winter. So yeah, by springtime they've managed to completely fall in love with their captors, and they decide they want to get married and they want to stay, which I wonder if that's kind of Stockholm syndrome to a large extent. So on the whole, plot-wise, the whole thing's pretty stupid. This film is kind of stupid. But bear with me, okay? So even though it was like kind of dated with its sexual politics in its own time, and Millie, the first woman to get married into this family, she marries the eldest, Adam, even their marriage is kind of a business relationship, and he's kind of horrible to her. So yeah, after this was kind of like a response in the 50s to post-war. So during the Second World War, there were a lot of, you might have heard of like land girls and things like that. A lot of women went into working in munitions factories and farming to pick up the slack in industries where men were away fighting a war. So these women got really independent, and they enjoyed working outside of the home, and having been in industries and situations that were normally kind of, they were blocked from, they kind of realized what they were missing. So it was very difficult for women to just go back into the home sphere. And there's a lot of depression amongst women, and a lot of, there's some divorces and things like that in response. So the 50s was very much a time where TV and movies were often reflecting this concept of women belong in the home, because men that had come back from war just wanted their lives back, and they wanted things to go back to the way they were before. So this 50s ideal of the housewife is actually sort of a constructed idea that wasn't really reflecting what was going on at the time. And it's kind of funny, I think a lot of people think of like the 50s housewife, and it's sort of, it's not that she didn't exist, but she sort of didn't exist in some ways. And you kind of see from this era, like, women are quite tough and witty in screwball comedies of the 30s, and then in the 50s, they're sort of screaming and in horror movies and are hysterical and that kind of thing. So there's this real kind of pushback of wanting to kind of reassert something that had already passed. But I don't think you can really see that when you're watching films now, because it's not like it was discussed. It's just kind of something that we know historically, if that makes sense. So this film fits in that bracket perfectly, and just kind of really shows that some people really wanted to identify with like an older time in America where men were tough and women were dainty or whatever, and this kind of I mean, I think there's something quite endearing about the rough mountain man and the woman from town, and like, it's, the idea is romantic, and I think it's a kind of idea that is still in romance novels and things like that today, and that's totally fine. But kidnapping is obviously not okay. Really, obviously not okay. And I mean, these girls are really frightened when they're kidnapped. Like, they don't know what's going to happen to them. So, considering this like really weird concept of this movie, why is it a thing? So it's got really catchy music. The cinematography, the choreography is amazing. So Michael Kidd had this way of choreographing things that would forward the story in some way, or kind of be kind of intrinsic to the environment. So we get barn raisings, farm chores, all kind of interpreted as dances. And that's actually really great. The music is super catchy, and the performances are like, well, they're kind of middling, so they're not bad. Millie's played by Jane Powell, and I actually really like what she does in this movie. I think she's good at playing the role she's given, even though I kind of think, obviously it's kind of sexist, but Howard Keel as Adam, I feel like he's a bit cheesy. That's the eldest brother. And the I wrote like the 7 little men in my notes, so that's like the 7 brothers. I mean, there's something kind of like, they're kind of man boys. They're all grown up and they just behave like 5-year-olds. So I don't know. It can be kind of funny sometimes, but it is a little bit strange. But the 7 brides of the title, they're all dancers, so they don't have like a huge background in acting, but obviously they come from a dance background, so they kind of understand performing, and I think they're really watchable. They're very pretty and graceful, and I kind of like them. So most of the film is shot on a soundstage. I think almost all of it except for 1 or 2 little bits. And the sets are really cute. They're kind of, they're almost like a storybook looking atmosphere and kind of design. So yeah, I kind of think it's the frontier, but the frontier never would have looked as good as this movie makes it look. I also think the dresses of the 7 brides kind of deserve a special mention. When they're kind of kidnapped, some of them are in their pajamas and different things. So over the course of the winter where they're stuck in the cabin, they have dresses made out of quilts, which look amazing. They have these tiny little, because it's 1850s, they have that like late 1800s, mid 1800s like silhouette, but with like quilted designs. And I just think it's a really, I don't know, I just love it. I think it's great. So the dresses were actually made from quilts that the studio found at a Salvation Army store and cut up to make the pieces for dresses, which is kind of creative use of quilts. But if you're a quilter or quilt lover, I think you're gonna love the dresses, but maybe cringe over the idea of beautiful antique quilts being chopped up for for dresses. I don't know. So yeah, the little history behind this film: MGM wasn't super keen on this movie. They were making Brigadoon at the same time, which you may have heard of. It's another big famous one. So Brigadoon was going a bit over budget, so they kind of pinched from the budget of this movie to prop up Brigadoon. But actually, this movie did quite well and is often in top 10 musical lists, which is kind of saying something when you think about the fact that this film is about kidnapping, and it's kind of horrible when you think about it. So it's a classic for its music and choreography, and it's kind of general cheerfulness. But yeah, it's kind of got, the acting isn't amazing, but it sort of doesn't matter because there's a lot of singing to kind of cover that up. And it has a really weird plot, so it's a kind of odd movie. It's an odd one. If you like musicals, I kind of recommend it. But I'm not a huge fan of musicals, and I think this one is a little strange. But then I think when you look at a lot of plots of musicals, there's like murder and cannibalism and all kinds of horrible things sort of covered over by cheerful songs. So maybe it kind of fits. So yeah, if you have seen this movie and you love it, or if me mentioning it makes you immediately start humming a tune, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Maybe you hate the kind of retroactive sexism in this film, or maybe you don't. I don't know. I'd love to hear what you think, of course. And yeah, give me a like or a subscribe or a special request. Whatever. I always like hearing from you guys, and thanks for watching.